Good afternoon and welcome to today's Georgetown Alumni Lifelong Learning webinar hosted by the Georgetown University Alumni Association. Thank you for taking time out of your day for today's lightning lecture, Navigating Your Social Presence at Work and Home with Professor Jeanine Turner. Jeanine Turner helps executives gain a strengthened sense of how best to communicate their presence. Using arguments, data, and audience analysis, Turner works with executives to choose messages and communication channels to create powerful stories. Her research and coursework explore persuasion, conflict resolution, and the impact of new media on organizational and interpersonal communication. When leading executive programs, Turner provides concrete skills and strategies for delivering information and messages, as well as specific tools for managing difficult conversations. Her book, Being Present, Commanding Attention at Work and at Home by Managing Your Social Presence, was published in January 2022 and is currently being read by the Alumni Association's Professional Development Book Club. Being Present provides strategies for addressing the challenges of engaging attention in a world of digital devices. The book earned a 2022 Gold Medal Axiom Publishing Award given to promising business titles and was also listed in the top 10 on JP Morgan's 2022 summer reading list. Additionally, Jeanine has published over 100 articles and book chapters and presented her work nationally and internationally. She loves teaching students and discovering the complexities of communication. I'm Kelly Young, Director of Career and Lifelong Learning and Alumni Relations, and I'll be facilitating today's program. Before we get started, I would like to share a few reminders. First, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel, and the link will be shared in our follow-up email. Jeanine will also take audience questions after the lecture. Please send in your questions using the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Without any further ado, I am happy to turn things over to Jeanine Turner.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's really wonderful to be here. It's an honor to be a part of this lecture series, especially because I know that I could have never done this research without the students that I've taught here at Georgetown. So to have alumni on the call and to be, I was honored, as Kelly mentioned, to be chosen as a book club book from for the Georgetown Book Club. So it's an honor to be a part of this community because I could have never done this research without it. Over the past, probably, I guess I've been at Georgetown now around 26 years, and over the years, I've really gotten to observe how social presence or the use of technologies and their connection to us and our person has really evolved and changed the way we communicate with each other. And really this book and this lecture is kind of a culmination of a lot of those observations that I've seen. And I'm hoping it provides some frameworks and ideas that you can use immediately to think differently about what I call your social presence. And when I think about social presence, I think about how you feel present with someone else in conversation. So this, for example, is kind of a weird social presence for me, right? Because I know, I'm hoping you're out there. I am imagining Kelly's telling me there's people out there, and but I can't see you, right? Whereas social presence in a face-to-face conversation, you see the person, you get those cues from that other person. Social presence in a text is very different. Social presence, if you post something in social media and watch the comments, that's very different. So we've spent, there's a lot of research out there on presence and mindfulness. What I want us to start thinking, especially over this next 45 minutes or so, is about your own social presence and the importance of thinking about your social presence on a moment-by-moment basis. And many of you maybe have found that, especially with the pandemic, when all of our technology and everything changed so dramatically, our infrastructures changed. Their only mechanism really for connecting to the world outside of our own homes was through technology. And so this collision of work and home, huge change in the way we were socially present to each other. In fact, the term social distance became so common in terms of how far away you needed to be from someone that now social presence almost makes more sense for people. So, but what I'd like you to do is take a little step back, because actually I think a lot of the changes to social presence started a little bit farther than that. So what I'd like you to do, is talk about social presence. I want to take some time for you to reflect on it and give you a sense of how it's changed and what's kind of caused those changes, and then what you can do about it as a result. So what I'm going to do is show some slides here. Let me see. You should be able to see the slides now. Is that correct, Kelly? I think they're there. So just
I don't yet see them, Jeanine.
You don't see them? Okay, let me see. How about now?
There you go.
Okay, perfect. Great. So what I want to do is take you back to some research I did with the National Journal in 2006. So basically, we were trying to see how do people inside the Beltway consume news or get information. And we found that they did newspaper, radio, and television in the morning, a little bit of television in the afternoon, and then newspaper, radio, and television in the evening. 1 year later, in 2007, with ubiquitous wireless computing, with a phone that you could walk around with and connect to the internet at any time, this is what it looked like. Huge change between 2006. You see all of this disruption all throughout the day. And this was prior to social media platforms, prior to Facebook or Instagram or any of those type of platforms. This was just getting out to the internet, and fewer people were even using text-based communication at that time. So huge change. 2005, people were looking to see Pope Benedict, that smoke to announce Pope Benedict. 2013, which we just celebrated the 10th anniversary of Pope Francis, complete difference in the way people were accessing information and the way they use their phones. This is a picture from Running with the Bulls in Pamplona that a chief medical officer from Spain sent me. But you see everyone has their cameras in their hand right before they are going to be pounced by this bull, so that I guess they post their picture to social media before in their last moments. This I found fascinating. These are zombie lights in Tel Aviv, but I think they also have these in New York City, and it's a sidewalk light that if you're looking down at your cell phone and you're not looking up at the camera for cars, you won't walk in front of a car. So when the zombie light is green, they call it, the camera light is red. Just showing just how much we have been disconnected from each other. In fact, some research prior to the pandemic said we touch our phones up to 2,600 times a day. So then our family's life starts looking like this, where people are together but not really together. Our friend situation starts to look like this, and then also it's impacted our workplace. Even more so in March of 2020, when all of our workplaces kind of shut down. And my PhD is in communication, so I think about communication all the time. And what I really see is our buildings, our organizations, our relationships, our networks, our teams are basically collections of conversations. Who gets to talk, who doesn't get to talk, how they get to talk, where they get to talk. And that was never more clear than when we no longer had a physical infrastructure to go to, and the only connections we had were conversations that we had over video or technology, except for the conversations we had in our house. And this kind of collision of work and home was kind of featured in the New Yorker magazine in December of 2020. This idea of, wow, how do we manage all of these juggling responsibilities and ideas? And what I've seen over time with my research, because I've been looking at this changing use of technology ever since I started into research with my PhD, where I studied telemedicine, is that as we have access to this digital device, we're more focused on our own needs, less focused on our audience. We're more concerned about our phone really than the physical presence around us. Physical presence often is background noise to our digital device. We value what we think of as anytime, anywhere communication. And I think this got even more the case since the pandemic, as people thought, wow, look at all this flexibility we have with work. But what the challenge that can come with that is it's not just anytime, anywhere communication, it's everywhere, all the time communication. And so how do you manage all of these messages in all these different roles of your life at the same time? And what it happens, unfortunately, is we start to think of our messages and our conversations as a ball to be juggled rather than human beings that we were interacting with and engaged with. And the reason why I think that's super challenging and problematic is as we treat people like a ball to be juggled, we lose track of the human part of communication. And if everyone likes you and everyone's going to do whatever you want them to do, and you have complete control over people, then I guess you could treat them a little bit like a task. But the more you have to influence people, the more you have to encourage people, the more you have to coach people, the more you have to help change someone's mind or deal with challenging conversations or conflict. You can't think of people as balls to be juggled, but you have to think of humans. And I think what's happened is, and my research has shown this, is we've had this huge increase, especially since the pandemic, in this practice of multi-communicating. And what my colleagues at Georgetown have been looking at multi-communicating for a number of years now. We've seen this increase, and what we call multi-communicating is when we're engaging in multiple conversations at any one time. This might be where I'm texting while I'm in a conversation, I'm emailing in a Zoom meeting. You might be working on your email now while you're listening to this lecture. So multi-communicating is when we're allocating part of our social presence to one conversation and part to another. And we start thinking that, wow, we can actually be in two places at once. In fact, we think, wow, we can be in multiple places at once. And the challenge behind that is that the more that you multi-communicate, the more you're dividing your attention between multiple conversations, the less attention, obviously, and the less focus you can give to each conversation. And it's very different than multitasking. When you think about multitasking, you think multitasking, we think of that as managing multiple tasks at once. Maybe it's working on an Excel file while you're also managing another document. Multitasking is not nearly as complex as multi-communicating, and all the research on multitasking says we can't do it. Maybe 3% of the population can. So multi-communicating, we're engaging different people in different roles with different histories, values, beliefs, different perspectives on the world, and we are thinking that we can keep two people at the same time. And it's really very, very hard to do, which is why I think one of the most important things we have to think about on a daily basis, both at work and at home, is how to build our social presence in every conversation. And just to give you a sense of how different the norms have, how norms have changed so quickly on what constitutes social presence, I'm going to share a few interview quotes that I've received just about this topic. So what's interesting, and I mentioned this also in the book, there was a CEO that I talked to in 2018 that basically said, and you see this on the left side of the screen, I work with someone in their 20s who is always on their phone during meetings with me. They're constantly checking their device. It drives me crazy. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to be that kind of person, but I am never going to promote him. You see another person, this wasn't the same person that was actually as a part of this conversation, but this person could have been. And they said, where I work, you need to show you're committed to the organization. You need to show you're busy. When I go into a meeting, I always respond to my device because I want everyone to see how responsive I am and that I will respond to them as quickly as well. I've seen these same norms change within the workplace since COVID, whereas I actually had one participant in one of my executive classes say that they view when someone is showing their camera in a meeting that they're actually less engaged, because if they're showing their camera in many meetings, they actually are not dealing with their email and all these other priorities that are going on at the same time, but they're managing their impression in kind of some kind of fake way. So ironically, while some people say, oh, put your cameras on, it'll show you're really engaged and you care about what's going on in a Zoom meeting, other people think if you've got your camera on, it means you're not actually working, because nobody could be completely focused in on one conversation. The point that I'm trying to make is that our norms have never been established on how we address digital devices and how we address communication technologies in everyday conversation. They've just evolved in, we have these assumptions about how people should be acting or working, and they're not. And you've seen even more of these norms kind of change and evolve since COVID, especially because there's no way that we could have communicated about those norms ahead of time. There's a term called meta communication, where you're communicating about the way you communicate. I would argue that if we had a year in March of 2019, and we said in 1 year, the whole world is going to shut down and we're only going to be able to communicate over our technological devices, we need to set up and be ready for our norms and routines of what's going to happen over the next year. Even with a year's warning, it would have been very difficult to establish all the norms that we would have needed to. And think about, we had like 2 to 3 days before everything shut down. So the idea that people have the same way of thinking about communication technology, engagement, what constitutes engagement, how to engage is impossible. And so it's really important to think about how do we think about social presence and how are we socially present. Here's just a couple other ones about this idea of controlling social presence. One tech executive said, "I've really liked working from home because I can get so much done. I feel like I've never been so productive. When I think of going back in person, all I can think about is all the time I'm going to be wasting, and I'll probably still be expected to get the same amount of work done." This gets to the point of, prior to the pandemic, sometimes organizations served as this container function, and you felt like you were going to work when you're in that kind of container. And even though sometimes your time got wasted, sometimes it didn't, you went to a meeting that you felt like you should have been at, or you went to a meeting you felt like, why was I invited to this meeting? You had this sense that I'm at work. Because we've been through the pandemic, where we've gotten used to working from home and we have this really strong laser focus on efficiency, our ideas for when we're wasting time and when we're not are much higher, are almost the bar for wasting time is higher. And you can see that from this quote. Another person, in terms of social presence and anxiety, in terms of returning from the pandemic and getting back to work, this one woman who had graduated from Georgetown said, "I really get anxious about being in person again because I don't have any control. At least on Zoom and on my social media platforms, I have control over my message. I don't have to use my camera. I can use filters and I can think through my message. I don't want to give up all that control, and I'm looking forward to the metaverse." And after my panel presentation, she actually came up and said, "Oh my gosh, when do you think the metaverse is going to happen? Because I think I could be so much more productive and work so much better if I could communicate in the metaverse and had complete control." So what I want us to think about now is the way that these digital devices have gradually creeped into our life. And so over time, we have had huge changes in our social presence. I think it started in our family lives, where the digital device came into our homes. And while some people might have rules for dinner conversation or not having phones during dinner, thought about their social presence that way, what really happened is we had the choice to be present physically with someone or to be in our phone. And the phone became almost a third person in every conversations that we were in. Now, fast forward, since the pandemic, we've had a lot of conversation about getting back in the workspace. How do we get people back to having impromptu, deep conversations? How do we increase the relationships and trust and connections that we have with each other? And I think that that is evidence of what's happening in the workplace actually is similar to what happened in our families as the digital device infiltrated our families. A great example of this that I want to share with you, and it's just a quick video, and ironically, it was created by IKEA. I think they were trying to feature furniture in a Thanksgiving kind of promotion, but it's interesting in the way they talked about digital devices and the impact it had on family communication. So I'm going to share that with you now. Then I'm going to come back and share my framework, and then I'd love to start a conversation. So let me go ahead and share this video with you really quick. It's in Spanish, but there are subtitles, so you'll be able to see what's going on. The reason why I share that video is because I think it's incredibly powerful, that really talks about the challenge we face if we can't get to deeper conversations. I think what's so powerful about Georgetown's community and their Ignatian kind of tradition of care for the whole person is this idea: if we don't bring our whole person to a conversation, we're never going to get to a deeper level. So just because we bring everybody back in the workplace and we hope to have these collisions where people just will happen to walk next to each other and have a conversation, unless we deal with the fact that we are dealing with distractions on a daily basis, and we have messages that are distracting us on a daily basis, and we need a framework for being intentional about each and every conversation, we're not going to ever get to those deeper conversations. So what I want to do is share with you this a framework that you can use to think about how to think about social presence. So in terms of that, I think you have 4 choices. It's not just turn your phone off and listen to me, because honestly, there's a lot of times that you're not going to be able to turn your phone off. For the past 2 years, if I would have told students to put their technology away and listen to me when I taught over COVID, we wouldn't even have had a class. So it's how can we be intentional about how we are being socially present to the people around us? And I think you have 4 choices. The first is budgeted. Budgeted presence is what we're in most of the time. You're probably in budgeted presence right now. You're partially listening to me while you're also texting, while you're also emailing, while you're checking social media platforms, while you're checking maybe something you have to do for work. So you're allocating part of your attention to me, part to other things in your life and other conversations. When we are not in budgeted, which is, I would argue, our default state, our phones are on and we're in that most of the time. When we're not in budgeted, we have to figure out what are we going to do with our phone, and what are we going to do with someone else who is in our conversation with us, with what are we going to do with their phone. And sometimes our knee-jerk reaction is, okay, I'm going to control someone else's space. Put your phone away and listen to me. Everybody shut down their phones and listen to me. Put your phone away in a one-on-one conversation. Or maybe if it's not even about technology, everyone has to come back to the workplace in person. I'm just going to require it. I don't have a reason, just everyone has to come back. So what I call that is entitled presence. We're trying to control the social presence of someone else. Sometimes it can work, a lot of times it doesn't. Interestingly, early on in my research, people would say they used it. Now, fewer and fewer people say they ever do this. So then what does that mean? If you're not in budgeted presence and you're not telling people what to do with your technology, how do you engage other people in presence, knowing that they had these devices with them at all times? So I think you actually have 2 choices. And if you think of this thoughtfully and intentionally and strategically, it can help you in every single moment. The first choice is competitive presence. Competitive presence is where I'm trying to persuade you. I actually am in competitive presence now. I'm trying to use videos, stories. I'm trying to use language that will get you engaged and hopefully interested in thinking about this framework and looking into it further, maybe emailing me and asking me some questions about it. I'd love to hear from you. So competitive presence, I'm trying to control the message, but I'm also doing it thinking about who you are, what you're interested in, and why you should care about this. So really thinking about it, all that we know from Aristotle: logos, pathos, ethos. How can you create a focused message that your audience cares about? The other type of presence, which I think is in most chance of getting lost, almost extinct, is invitational. What I think of as invitational is dialogue. Looking at my audience as a partner, not so much as an investor. In a competitive presence, I'm kind of thinking my audience as investor. Now instead, I'm thinking of my audience as a partner, someone that I want to engage with, someone I want to learn from, which requires ongoing conversation, deep conversation, which is why I shared the IKEA video. No one knows about anyone else in their family in those videos because they haven't got to an invitational space. They spend a lot of their time at the shallow level. And while we've seen it in our families, we're now seeing how it could also be, those same kind of challenges could be happening in the workspace. And just a quick review, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, budgeted, you're really working on efficiency. And again, please remember, I'm not saying put your technology away all the time and always focus on one conversation at a time, because there's no way we can get through the day. We have so many overwhelming messages that we have to address, and we have to figure out how to address them. But we also have to recognize that sometimes we're budgeted not because we're trying to get through specific messages, but because we're bored. Maybe where there's a silence in a conversation that we're in, so we're afraid for this awkward silence, so we have to look at our phone really quickly. And most of the research says that if you have your phone up or you're looking at your phone, a conversation is not going to go deeper. And the risk also is that you're going to damage relationships and miss cues because people think you don't care, people think you're not paying attention. Again, entitled, I'm trying to control my audience's presence. That requires a lot of status or a strong relationship or a message that people are just dying to hear. It's harder and harder and harder to get into entitled presence. I think sometimes it can make sense, but often it's challenging. And if I did pick entitled presence, I would have an explanation for it. So for example, let's say I have a meeting coming up on Friday and I want to make sure everybody's engaged and focused in this meeting. I might, in an agenda, let people know on Friday during this meeting, here's the 3 questions I'd like to talk about, and I'd like for us to only focus on this conversation, and I'd like us to not use our phones. So give people a warning to help them understand, and also a rationale. Because now, because everyone has their device, you actually have to ask for permission in a very kind of challenging and weird way, because you have no idea what other messages that they are also dealing with at the same time. I think when many organizations tried to pull everybody back to the workspace in physical space and kind of created this kind of rigid structure, or they're counting cars to see if people are engaged or not engaged, there was a huge pushback to that approach, because it wasn't trying to control technology so much, but it was absolutely trying to control social presence in what people thought of as kind of an entitled, powerful way that people had not earned the right to ask for that. Competitive presence, again, you're treating your audience as an investor, and you have in the back of your mind, why should your audience care about whatever it is you're talking about? So it requires you really think about, in a laser focused way, who is my audience, what do they care about, and what is it that I need from them? And am I providing the message they need so that they can do whatever it is I want them to do? And in my research in the book, I talk about some frameworks for how to get your point across in a focused and concise way. Of course, there's the risk people aren't going to pay attention to you, but that's always been our risk, right, in terms of keeping our audience engaged. And then finally, invitational is by far, I think, the most challenging type of social presence to create, because you have to create a space where people feel safe to talk, and they feel valued, that they feel as if their perspective will be valued by you, and they feel free to express what they want. And it takes time. Some people can get into that space fast. Some people take a little time to get into that space. And so you really have to think of your audience as a partner. Your goal is understanding. You're working on active listening, and you're creating an environment where somebody will want to talk to you. In this situation, you wouldn't necessarily tell people what to do with their technology, but you yourself would definitely model 100% focus on this conversation. And even if you think back along your day of how much time you spend in each of these different types of presence, and what's the diet that you think you might need to have in different relationships, it gives you, I think, a focused way to think about how to approach your conversations. Because it's so easy, especially since the pandemic, to just pick up your phone and start looking at it, or to think, wow, I am going to leverage the fact that I'm at my child's soccer game while I'm also able to be in this meeting. Isn't this great that now I've never been able to go to the soccer game before, but now every time she makes a goal, she looks up and she sees me on the phone. So it's really thinking about where are the spaces where I'm going to be 100% focused on this other person. I think invitational space, this last kind of picture is just an example. I talk about this in the book. My daughter had wanted to go to this restaurant that had these kind of shakes, and it was in New York City, and we took this bus to New York City, and we were super focused on having this amazing time in New York City. We got to see a play, but she really wanted to see this place that she could have these shakes. And so we took an Uber over to this restaurant, and we get there, it's pouring down rain, it's really dark outside. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not going to stand in line for 45 minutes for overpriced shakes and hamburgers. But she's like, no, 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 we have to stand in line. And I know she probably wanted to take a picture of her food so that she could then share with other people. So I said, fine. I said, but how much percentage do you have in your phone? And she looked, she had like 2% on her phone. You know, Michael, he had maybe 2%. I didn't have much. And I said, wouldn't it be horrible if we got all the way up to that restaurant and you couldn't take a picture of your food? Because isn't that why we were in line? So we actually turned our technology off, which was kind of entitled presence in a way. But because of that, we had such a great conversation in the worst possible conditions of rain, dark, cold outside. And on the way back from New York, we were on the bus. I said, what was your favorite part? And they both said, standing in line at Black Tap. They had so much fun. And we wouldn't have had that fun because we would have been on our phones when we were waiting around. I think there's so often that we are on our phones and not engaging. And so my biggest challenge for you is budgeted presence is necessary. You need to be in budgeted presence. I totally get that. However, recognize that there are other choices. Competitive, for example, think about you're going to have to compete with people's devices for their attention. And invitational, don't forget about it. And you will not be able to get to invitational. We'll lose the ability to get there if we don't really focus on who we are and how we can bring our whole self to the conversation. I think we talk about Cura Personalis and we think about what Ignatian values as Georgetown alumni. And I feel like that so much of what we learn from that in terms of caring for each other is about bringing our whole self to a conversation. And so I hope this has been helpful, thinking about your social presence, reflecting on social presence. And Kelly, also, I have a couple just worksheets and kind of ideas that you can think about to keep these ideas in your head and kind of review them for later that I think she's going to get out to you. So I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I'd love to hear your questions or to continue the conversation now. And I'm so happy for this opportunity.
Thanks so much, Jeanine. So the handouts that Jeanine was referencing, you can find them in the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel. And we are opening it now to questions. So if you have any questions, please do submit them via the questions section of your webinar control panel. So we do have a couple of notes of thanks, Jeanine, and also some shout outs for that amazing video. So, you know, wonderful to see that example of, you know, what you've been talking about. So one question that's come in, has any of your research touched on or come up against multi-communicating and, you know, its impacts on employee burnout?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for bringing that up, because actually we have done some research in terms of like a stress. So there's a certain level where you can multi-communicate and you feel as if you're energized, you're getting things done because it's maybe some tasks that are easy to handle. And so you're actually feeling super efficient at your ability to get things done. But at a certain point, it's become so overwhelming. And I've had in my research with executives, especially, and students in my classes, especially since the pandemic, the stress and the exhaustion. People talk about this Zoom exhaustion, but I think there's also this exhaustion from messages, especially because as we've gotten more flexible and we've kind of traded, it's almost been a Faustian bargain. We've traded flexibility for working all the time. And then the reason why it can be so stressful and overwhelming is because we're often moving from very different roles. So I might have my one role as a professor at Georgetown, and I get a call from so for example, my mom is suffering from dementia. So I might get a call from the place where she's living, and I immediately am thinking, oh my gosh, what's going on with my mom? I'm worried about that. Or I get a text from my son who's in college and he's far away. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what's going on with that? And then maybe I have a student that has emailed me and is worried about something. So you have, even within the same organization, you have these different roles. But then if you, on top of that, have these different roles in your life and expectations, and some could be great things that are happening. Oh, I just found this out, or I just got accepted at this job, or I had this great opportunity. It takes so much energy to emotionally be prepared for all of those different messages. I think it was hard in email, where you would go from one email to the next with very different roles, responsibilities, and expectations in each email, and then you had to kind of gear yourself up for that. Now you're getting it from multiple devices in multiple places. And so absolutely, I think there's an exhaustion. In fact, I heard this great suggestion the other day from one organization that has decided to do kind of anytime, anywhere work. So they don't have a physical presence kind of space, but they actually have designated on Fridays no synchronous meeting days, which I think is such an interesting idea, because what's happening is if you're in this anytime, anywhere meeting, you almost have this feeling of, wow, I have to be always available, and you're overwhelmed. Whereas by setting off this, it's not a physical in-person kind of set off, it's instead an lack of synchronous at the same time meetings. So then you know that you're going to get a chance to not have to be pretending to pay attention in all these different spaces. So I love that question, because I think it's at the heart of the challenge that we're facing. And sorry, one more thing, you're probably like, give me, like, just stop, keep talking. But it also stresses that this is not an individual decision. It's also something that organizations and teams and families need to make in conversation with each other. How are we going to approach the phone use on our vacation? How are we going to approach the phone use in this dinner that we're going to have? How are we going to approach phone use in this meeting in our organization? So we have to communicate about our communication, because it's not even just an individual decision anymore. It is also an organizational decision. Wow, great question.
Great answer. So another question, do you know what techniques can prepare teenagers for entering the world of college and work with our unavoidable attachment to devices? Do you have any sort of strategies around training them to budget and think about their different environments as invitational or competitive?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. Okay, so what I think, what I really noticed, and in some of the research, is a number of freshmen. I had a focus group with them, and they said, what's so challenging now, because people have, I mean, many of you, if you graduated from high school before all of these phones, you remember that when you got to college, if you went away to school, you had to meet new friends, you had to engage, and so you had to build these networks. And so we almost got used to knowing how to make those connections. This group of students, to your point, does not have to ever make new friends, because they have all these friends from high school, and they have all these social media followers and all these Instagram connections. And so there's this kind of fallback. And so it's always been hard to make new friends, but now you don't actually have to. And what is challenging is there's this window almost that freshmen told me about, where you almost feel like you can't introduce yourself to someone because they're on their phone. I used to go into classes and I would have to say, settle down, it's time to get started. Instead, I go into classes now and everybody's quiet because everyone's on their phone. So my advice to students, and my advice to my own children, though I don't know how much they're following it, is I talk about invitational presence all the time, and I actually practice. I think we need to practice about invitational presence in conversations. I have to practice it myself as well, and to be comfortable with not looking at your phone for short periods of time, so that you're open to looking up and making a friend, or looking up and being in a conversation, or looking up and engaging. And I think just small increments of time, 10 minutes at a time, 15 minutes at a time. I'm going to join some clubs, and I'm going to go to this club, and I'm going to I'm not going to look at my phone during this club meeting. And I'm going to look around, I'm going to observe, I'm going to try to find people that I'd like to talk to, because even though everyone else might be on their phone, just taking some time to really sit with yourself in the meeting, you might pick up on some cues and opportunities for friendships and connections that you wouldn't have before. I've actually had students say they wish that Georgetown would turn off the Wi-Fi for a few hours of every day, so that you wouldn't feel like you had to be connected. And I think it really points to that this generation is also looking for strategies for short bites of time of how to address these technologies. So it's a great question. And actually, we're working at Georgetown with student services. I work with Erica Cohen-Dur, and we're thinking about what are some things we can do to help students even more thinking about social presence.
Fascinating. So this question it's pretty particular to the audience member that asked it, but I think you could perhaps broaden it out to think more more broadly about how we're managing our presence over Zoom rather than in face-to-face. So the question itself is, any suggestions for an actor presently auditioning by self-tape, primarily how to engage the attention of clients in video, especially when, you know, you might only have a very short amount of time to do that and really grab your audience.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for that question. And to be honest, I think that we have so much to learn from actors that are needing to do self-tapes in an asynchronous way and submitting them, because I think that's what they're talking about in terms of that. And what I want everyone to learn from this conversation, because the person that asked the question already knows how challenging it is that when you don't have an audience in front of you, in a synchronous way. So it's hard synchronous when people don't have their cameras on, but even when you can see all of their cameras and you see them, that's hard because you don't really know whether they're really paying attention to you or not. But an asynchronous situation where you're sending in a self-tape, or if you think about from a workplace situation where you might send a video for people to observe and then maybe have a dialogue and a conversation later. The reason why it's so hard to communicate in that context is you have to mentally think about how engaging you're being, and you're projecting to an audience, especially an actor who feeds off an audience. And we all, in a sense, feed off of that. So you have to know your lines, you have to know what you're trying to say, you have to understand your context more than if you, even more so than if you were talking to an audience and seeing them. And so just generalizing back to all of us, when you're doing a video, which is why video presentations are so hard, especially an asynchronous, not at the same time video where you're filming it for someone to see later. In fact, I present all the time. I teach people about presentations. I spend a lot of time on it. And I myself, if I'm doing an asynchronous type video, whether for a class or something like that, where it's going to be filmed later, I write it out completely, the transcript completely. I write it out in conversational style. I step back so it doesn't look like I'm reading, because if it looks like you're reading, you lose your authenticity immediately. And I throw myself into what my face should be for an engaged conversation. And that is mental cognitive work that I never have to do if I have an audience in front of me. It just comes naturally that I'm going to be engaged. I mean, think about how you don't have to tell yourself not to use tell yourself to use your hands in conversation. You just start using it because your body's trying to help you. Your body has to be told to pretend, and that is cognitive effort that is taken away from your message. So I love this question from an actor, because I think actors are going to have to be teaching executives about how to think about asynchronous videos and how to present in these contexts, because it's more and more going to be the case that we're going to have to think about how do we create content that way. Thank you so much. That's a great question.
Thank you, Jeanine. We are at time now, but this has been wonderful, and you have given us so much to think about and apply in our own lives. Thank you for taking the time to share this lecture and conversation with our community. Thank you to our audience for joining today. Please look out for our follow-up email, which will include more information on upcoming programs, as well as a feedback survey and link to today's recording. Jeanine, thank you again.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day, everyone, and Hoya Saxa.